Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathryn. For those of you who don't know me, I'm down in the New Bedford office, and I run the habitat program there. Our tagline is healthier habitats for more fish. And consistent with the other programs, the first talks the programs give, they've introduced their org chart. So this is our org chart here. We have offices in Gloucester and New Bedford. So down in Gloucester, there's Mark, Tay, Forrest, and Kate. And in New Bedford, we have John, Eileen, and Steve Voss. The Habitat program is primarily responsible for environmental review. So any permit application that comes in through the regulatory system for coastal construction, docks, piers, pipelines, we review those for potential impacts to marine resources. We also handle offshore wind and impact research under environmental review umbrella. We have some research programs into artificial reefs. Mark is the artificial reef coordinator. We have an eelgrass restoration and monitoring program. We handle ocean planning, and we also have a climate change program. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the Massachusetts Ocean Management Plan. I'm going to first cover why we have one, then I'll talk about what it is. But I'll hopefully spend most of the talk on the Ocean Plan Fisheries Work Group maps. So the Fisheries Work Group is responsible for 4 maps in the Ocean Plan: concentrated recreational fishing, high commercial fishing effort and value, important fish resource areas, and the fixed fishing facilities map. Okay, so why do we have an ocean plan? Well, 20 years ago, in coastal Massachusetts waters, far from docks and piers, Cape Wind was proposing to build in Nantucket Sound. Winthrop proposed to dig up Mass Bay to fill the beach, and LNG pipelines were being proposed everywhere. So Massachusetts passed the groundbreaking Oceans Act. The Oceans Act was passed in 2008, and it directed EEA to develop an integrated ocean management plan. And the real purpose for the plan was to identify and protect special, sensitive, or unique areas. These are known as SSUs, to reflect the importance of Mass waters to those who derive their livelihoods and recreational benefits from fishing. These areas are mapped, and they're called WDUs, or water dependent use areas for existing uses. And to identify appropriate locations and performance standards for new activities, uses, and facilities that are allowed by the Ocean Sanctuaries Act. So those are cables, pipelines, renewable energy, sand mining for beach nourishment, and aquaculture. There's also a component of the ocean plan that addresses wastewater, but I won't be talking about that today. So the ocean plan in a nutshell is siting and performance criteria for specific ocean uses. And the plan relies on maps to indicate where important resources and uses are. CZM is in charge of the plan and the plan updates, and the plan has to be updated every 5 years. The first plan was drafted or was finished in 2009. That's the original ocean plan. It was reviewed and updated in 2015, and we're currently in a review and update stage right now in 2020 and 2021. So how does it work? The way it's set up is that if a construction project is located in the ocean management planning area, and the ocean management planning area on the map on the left is the red boundary. Can you guys see my cursor when I'm pointing? Is that visible?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, thanks. So the boundary is in red here. This is considered a blue water plan for Massachusetts because it doesn't cover the coastline or major embayments like Boston Harbor, Duxbury, Kingston, Plymouth. It starts about 1,500 feet offshore. So if a project's located in these waters and that project triggers NEPA thresholds, the project will be reviewed by an interagency ocean management team. And that team uses a set of maps to determine what resources and uses a project must address. The team then assesses conformance with the siting and performance criteria in the plan, determines if the project is the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative, or LEDPA, and assesses if an ocean development mitigation fee is required. So this map in the middle here is a sand mining map. It gives you an idea of what all of our maps all together look like. So if a particular SSU or WDU is thought to be incompatible with sand mining, then any sand mining project that triggers a MIPA threshold will have to assess its impacts to those SSUs and WDUs directly. So here are the siting and performance criteria for cables and pipelines. The way it's set up is that for the SSU resource areas that are identified for a particular use, that use is presumptively excluded from those SSU areas. So the idea is that the project will just not happen in those areas. However, a company can rebut that exclusion by saying that our maps are wrong, or that this is the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative. And so that there are some ways around it. The performance standards are things like the project has to have a public benefit, the project has to avoid damage to SSU resources, and there can't be any significant alteration. Here are, for cables, the box on the right shows the SSUs that are relevant for cables. So a cable project only has to directly address these SSUs. In the case of pipelines, there's one more SSU, the important fish resource areas, as well as some WDUs, the areas of high commercial fishing effort and value and areas of concentrated recreational fishing. So I'm going to focus the talk on where these maps come from, specifically the fisheries maps. The way the ocean plan is set up is that there are 6 work groups. The top 4 in this list, habitat, fisheries, transportation and navigation, and sediment resources, actually develop all of the maps that are in the ocean plan. Recreational and cultural services and energy and infrastructure focus more on trends, things that are emerging as issues or needs. Although I believe this update period, recreational and cultural services is going to provide some sort of map that will be built into the system as well. All of these maps are reviewed and updated every 5 years. So the fisheries work group is responsible for 4 maps, which I'll explain in just a second. It's a pretty big group. It's about half DMF and then half outside folks. It was started, you'll see some names in here for folks that are no longer at DMF, and that's because this project started in November of 2019, and we're just finishing up our report now. The report was submitted last week. We also have some external help. We have John Hare at NOAA, Steve Cadron, Chris McGuire, a couple folks from the Northeast Regional Ocean Council that are involved with mapping for the ocean data portal, and then some staff support from CZM from Samantha and Presida. This time around, we also formed a recreational fishing advisory committee, and that was Kevin Blinkoff, Khalil, Tim Brady, Ray Kanan, and Mike Perdnock. So this group was called together in 2019. The Recreational Fishing Advisory Committee was called together in the summer of 2020, and these groups reviewed and updated the maps. So the 4 maps, there are 2 water dependent use maps, concentrated recreational fishing and high commercial fishing and effort and value. We have 1 SSU called important fish resource areas. And then there's another map that we're proposing be included in the ocean plan, but it isn't right now. And that's called the fixed fishing facilities map, and it includes aquaculture and weirs. So I'm going to go through each map and explain how they're made. For concentrated recreational fishing, this map was made for both the 2009 and 2015 ocean plans. Surveys were done by by both DMF and a group called C-Plan, and these surveys were combined. Areas that were identified by more than 1 survey respondent were included in the final map. And this, the map on the right is what is in the current ocean plan. So this is the map that the Recreational Fishing Committee reviewed and kind of came up with a plan for what to do with it. Since there was no new survey and no resources to do a new survey, the advisory committee recommended using the same map. They largely felt that this map was adequate for identifying the areas that they would highlight on a recreational fishing map. And they also recommended that this continue to be applied to tidal energy, sand mining, and pipeline projects. They also proposed that in the next 5 years, that the survey be redone, and using the database that we now have for anglers, we try to reach several thousand anglers. The original surveys really, I think the numbers were less than 70 anglers were surveyed originally. So they like the idea of having a much more robust survey of recreational anglers to determine where hotspots are in use. The high commercial fishing effort and value, here is the 2015 Ocean Plan map. It was generated with data from 1988 to 2012. This map is applied to tidal energy, sand mining, and pipelines. And it identifies areas of high commercial fishing effort and value. It has a good name. So the original analysis was redone this time around in this review period, but there were a couple of improvements to the method, which I'll explain in a minute. We also looked at the impact of the lobster fishery by running the analysis without lobster. So we start with two data streams, the effort data stream and the value data stream, to create two different sets of data. So for effort, the non-shellfish effort was handled by assigning trips to each statistical reporting area based on the proportion of the catch from each statistical reporting area. And for shellfish, it was just trips per designated shellfish growing area. And those different reporting areas are here on the right, SRAs on top and DSGAs on the bottom. For value, the landings were converted to live pounds. And the live pound values were multiplied by the annual statewide landings weighted average price per live pound. These were then standardized by area to create effort per unit area and value per unit area. These two were then split north and south, basically to create, to make sure that patterns in the north don't overwhelm patterns in the south, because the fisheries are so much higher value and greater effort north of Cape Cod. So we wanted it to be relative to the location in the state. So they were split north and south and then reclassified into 10th percentile bins, kind of basically ranked 1 to 10. And we had relative effort and value in the north and relative effort and value in the south, which were then added together. And those were then reclassified into the top 25%, middle 50%, and bottom 25%, and combined together into a final map. The methods that changed, we elected to use the time series of 2009 to 2019 instead of 1988 to 2019. So we do have data back to 1988, but the trip level reporting program was implemented in 2009, and that data stream is just a lot more reliable. It's higher quality data, and it's more reflective of current trends to use this more recent data. And since the Ocean Plan really isn't about long-term value, it's much more about what's happening right now that we need to protect from construction, it was decided to use that more recent data set. The value originally used a fixed price. So the 2012 annual price, average annual price was applied to the whole data set for the last Ocean Plan map. This time it was updated, the method was updated to use the annual average price because it's a much more accurate valuation. So here are the results. On the left is the map that's currently in the Ocean Plan, and on the right is the proposed update. The red colored areas would be what actually is in the Ocean Plan. And we find that the results are pretty similar overall. The main differences are down around the Vineyard and off of Duxbury, the sort of south coast of Boston. Those fall out, but the backside of the Cape around Monomoy and certainly Cape Ann remain pretty dominant. We also looked at the data set without lobster, just to explore the impact of the lobster fishery on the data, and find that really what happens is we lose Cape Ann by and large, but Cape Cod Bay becomes a lot more important in the analysis. So this was really more for informational purposes. It won't be used it's not being proposed to be used in the ocean plan. All right, important fish resource areas is the next map. This is an SSU map, special sensitive or unique areas map. And the map in front of you is what's in the plan right now from 2015. It's applied to tidal energy, sand mining, and pipelines. And for this update and review period, the work group did the original analysis plus what we're calling a vulnerability approach. So the method that's used to create this map is using the DMF trawl survey data. 22 species of commercial or recreational importance are used, and this is the list on the right. Fall and spring are combined, and they're mapped by biomass or abundance. The abundance is used for Jonah crab, cod juveniles, and black sea bass juveniles. These are averaged by survey stratum over 1978 to 2018 and 2008 to 2018. The original maps used the longer time series of 78 to whatever the most recent time period was for the previous ocean plans. But this group wants to look at using that more recent time frame for the same reasons we did it for commercial fishing effort and value, that more recent information is more relevant for this particular purpose. So what happens with this data is that the median trimeme biomass of all species in each stratum is split north and south, is used, and we split it north and south and then reclassify those medians into the high, medium, and low. And the high, top 25% actually gets moved into the ocean plan as the important fish resource area. So we combine the north and south for the final map on the right. So here are the results. I have the current map right here on the left, the trimemes biomass assessment using the full time series of 78 to 2018 is in the middle. And then the more recent time period is on the right. The work group recommends using the more recent time period. The major difference is we lose Nantucket Sound in the more recent time period because we've seen a decline in biomass in Nantucket Sound. And we also see by using a more recent time period that the deeper strata are more important. That's particularly apparent south of the Cape. And this area off of the backside of the Cape, that's all in the south of the Cape region. So there are some questions about the approach we've used. Many of the species aren't vulnerable to construction, and maybe we don't need to consider them in terms of construction impact. And this came about primarily because the original, the important fish resource areas originally is not reviewed by cable projects. And we found that the Atlantic Link Cable Project didn't take into consideration cod spawning in Mass Bay when it was first kind of getting going and doing its pre-app meetings under the ocean plan. And so there was an effort by the fisheries work group to consider ways to improve or prevent that from happening again and improve the approach. So we experimented with what we're calling this vulnerability method. So there we just brainstormed which species were vulnerable to cables, pipelines, and sand mining. And we found overlap between pipelines and sand mining. So the same species are vulnerable to both. And then we have a different list for those vulnerable to cables. And then we split them into the ones that we could map on the left and the ones we couldn't map that are on the right. So I'll just pause here for a second. You can quickly glance through the different species that we're looking at. We just don't have data sources to map the ones on the right. So for this method, we use the same averaging approach using the trimeme. And then the strata were ranked by the top 6 strata. And this again brings in sort of that 25% approach because 25% of all the strata are 6 strata. Then an index was used to combine both the biomass in those strata as well as the diversity, which is the number of times the stratum was ranked for the individual species or species groups that were mapped. And then the top 6 ranked strata became the most important. And we also recommended adding the cod spawning closure areas, which is the map here, the big pink box. So this is the result from the vulnerability method. This map in 2015, again, applied just to tidal energy, sand mining, and pipelines. What the recommendation is now is to use this vulnerability approach, but have a different map, one for cables and one for pipelines and sand mining. The group did not think that renewable energy, specifically tidal energy, should use this map because tidal energy is going to affect pelagic resources, and this map does not reflect pelagic resources at all. So the cables area, the cables map, we find it's mapping 11% more area than the 2015 map, and the pipeline sand mining map 25% more area. And part of this is driven by the inclusion in the Nantucket Sound for the pipelines and sand mining map, because we, for those species, we include horseshoe crabs, Jonah crabs, and so that becomes more important, Nantucket Sound. For tidal energy, the proposal is just to do project-specific review and not actually have a map. There are only a few places where tidal energy will go, so that seems pretty reasonable. Of course, there are problems with this method too. We couldn't map all vulnerable species, most notably shellfish species. Many species impacts can be avoided through time of year or other measures, so this may be a little overreaching. Now we have so much area protected. Could this mean that those protections become less meaningful? So is there another way we can really get at areas that should be completely protected from construction because of impacts to fish or fisheries, areas that we really want to make sure are completely avoided? A couple of the changes here, the recommendation is to use the more recent time series, again, because it's more reflective of current trends, to use a vulnerability method instead because it better addresses the question at hand here, which is which areas need to be protected from specific types of impacts. And then lastly, we have our fixed fishing facilities map. We actually did create this map for the last ocean plan, but it was not put into the ocean plan. It's just in the fisheries workgroup report. This map includes existing aquaculture leases and weirs. And the fisheries workgroup is recommending that this be added to the ocean plan as water dependent use areas and have a presumptive exclusion for all activities in the ocean plan. This is actually a kind of minor deal because a lot of these things are shoreward of the ocean management planning area. But there are a few, and so we think that they should be reflected in the plan, just for completeness sake. So the map on the left is from 2013. The weirs have the arrows pointing to them. Can't see them very well. The major aquaculture areas are circled. The map this year from 2020, you can view it a little easier. You can see the weirs in blue and the aquaculture lease areas in red. This is all of the weirs, just so you know, and then it's only the aquaculture areas that are in the ocean management planning area. So the ones that are shoreward of the OMPA are not on the map because there are a lot of them. Aquaculture is supposed to be built into the ocean plan, and it hasn't been at this point. It's been a sticky problem, but we do continue to make progress. We have, from the beginning, made incremental progress on including aquaculture. And in the last few years, we've made a lot of progress, actually, particularly in working with an interagency working group to understand how aquaculture permitting is done in Massachusetts, where there are gaps and problems and inconsistencies. And we created a Massachusetts Aquaculture Permitting Plan document that lays out, how aquaculture could be built into the ocean plan or should be addressed by the ocean plan, as well as how cumulative impacts could be assessed. There's also a permitting website that we created that outlines the steps that a person would go through to get an aquaculture permit. It's pretty complicated. So it's a step-by-step approach to that. I think there are 16 steps and a lot of sub-steps too. So it's tough, but at least it's laid out now. This year, we're also working with the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act to add aquaculture to their regs as a specific use. So we can identify which types of aquaculture projects would trigger MIPA and even need to be considered in the ocean plan. And then in the next 5 years, we're hoping that we can propose siting and management standards that can actually be built into the ocean plan. Okay, that's all I've got. Just a quick thank you here to return to the Star Wars theme. I hope you can see it. Lots of people helped with this, and I'd be happy to take any questions.